Voice. I'm Lizi Arbogast with Caleb Brooks, and we are going to talk sports in 2020. It's been quite the incredible year, between the pandemic and the cancellation of sports. I mean, a time that you never thought that you'd ever see in the sports world. It's like we were just talking when we were talking about the year in review, and it's like Kobe Bryant died this year. Like, that seems like 6 years ago because this year has just been so crazy. So, first of all, just kind of tell us how your thoughts on. I know that you and your family is kind of obsessed with sports. I mean, what do you do when there's no sports?
I was bored. I was thinking about it. We were talking about the time period between, it was like March 11th is when really things started stopping with sports. And then I was telling you, UFC came back in May. It was only 2 months off. And I look back and it felt like it was half a year off. Like, that's how long that time period felt like to me. I was playing a lot of video games and watching some shows and stuff like that. I actually took on, this is kind of funny, I took on the Braves season. So since they weren't going to get to play the season, I got MLB The Show, literally played all 162 games of the season on the show, and then got into playoffs. And but that's how I had tried to fill my time, was there wasn't nothing on. I mean, there was nothing to do. I have UFC Fight Pass. I went back and watched old fights and did all that and try to fill time, but that was all there was to do, was watch old games, find a TV show to get into, which I did during that time. Me and my roommate have gotten into watching some shows together because of it, but I like this time a lot.
And you were watching Survivor, which is kind of a sports a sports thing.
Right? Look, anything that I'm watching, unless cop shows and all that, I watch cop shows. Outside of that, it's got to have some competition. In it.
It is crazy too. I remember the night that everything happened, when March Madness went down, and the NBA shut down, and it was like, oh gosh. And it was the night that Dadeville High School was hiring. We thought they were hiring their new football coach. So it's kind of ironic how that timing worked out. You got into these new coaches that couldn't see their team because everyone was in quarantine and schools were shutting down.
I remember we had just finished the finals up in Birmingham, and I was going to Fairfield, who won 5A. And I was at Fairfield High School, and next thing I know, I start getting my phone blown up about Big Ten's canceling the tournament, ACC's canceling the tournament, and then Alabama and Tennessee were about to play the first game of the tournament, or of that Thursday. They get canceled, and all of a sudden, it started to become a reality. The NBA canceled that game, and you're like, I hope this isn't what's going to happen with all this other stuff. And then that day, on that Thursday, I'll never forget, it really all started becoming a reality that, hey, this stuff's getting canceled. I remember my dad and them went and played at Mumford that Friday, and or that Saturday, and he called me and Connor and said, hey, I want y'all to be here because I think this is probably going to be Cade's last, last game. And you're kind of sitting there at the time like, it'll be his last game. They're going to figure out a way to get this stuff done. But unfortunately for all those guys, they weren't able to finish their seasons as seniors. You had basketball players, even though they canceled that year, and they didn't get that year back. It's not like football this year where they got a whole, baseball players and stuff. There was basketball players last year in college that didn't get to finish their senior year, didn't get and we don't have a champion. We don't have, so that kind of stuff was really weird. It's weird to think back to that time period. I tell people all the time, I was with someone the other day that I interviewed before the pandemic hit, and I was like, we'd have never imagined it. We were sitting there, it was February, right before the finals were about to get going, and you would have never thought that 2 weeks later the world would be flipped upside down. We had a packed out, there's 13,000 people to watch Robert E. Lee and Mountain Brook play a basketball game, and that's the last big crowd sporting event that we've had here in the state of Alabama from a high school standpoint. And we hadn't had that many people at a game since. So it's really, really weird to think back on it and think about how weird this whole entire year's been.
And I also, remember back when it first happened, it seems like I wrote a column when I was still working at the newspaper, when tragic things happen, right? Like when 9/11 happened, we all looked at the first Giants game afterwards. And, it's all these like major sporting events that kind of have ended up bringing people back together after really bad things have happened.
We didn't get that.
That wasn't a possibility.
Yeah.
It was like, and so it was very strange for people that have been so involved in sports for so long. And I know, a lot of people have made the argument about, just cancel high school sports. Sports aren't important. Like they're not and while, yes, I understand that sports are not an actual essential function of life, they do provide so much more than just a game on a football field. I think
they are an essential function of life because you look at the way that sports changes people's lives. I mean, me and you are closer to high school athletes than a lot of other people because of what our jobs are, and we've gotten to see the way that there's certain kids that you know of and I know of, if they weren't playing sports, they'd be doing something that they shouldn't be doing. And you
or
know,
they wouldn't go to college.
Yeah, I mean, they wouldn't get opportunities that they've gotten. So I think sports are essential, and I think that for these kids, they put in so much work in school and doing all this other stuff that's been asked of them that they deserve to have the opportunity to have fun just like everybody else has gotten in their lifetime. And I think, you know, at a time, I think back in the 60s, 70s, you could look at sports and just say, you know, it's just a good activity. Sports turned into a business now, and high school too. I mean, you know, it makes these high schools money. It you know, provides kids with a bunch of opportunities and things. And I think that to the level that sports has gotten to with importance in our whole country, I think sports are essential. And I think that you could tell a big difference when we got them back in the way that people weren't arguing over politics as much anymore. They weren't arguing, I mean, because you had other things to talk about and to focus on and to come together with. And I think that that's a big thing. I mean, sports bring people together. There's Alabama and Auburn fans that don't like each other, but on Sundays they're cheering for the same team. You know? And it's crazy how different that can be, where Saturday you can not like somebody and not like their team. The next day you're all cheering for the same person and you're getting along. You know, it's that type of stuff that makes sports so special. And I just think that when you look at the way that it's impacted kids' lives, it's impacted, you know, it's allowed a lot of people opportunity. If there wasn't sports, you know, we wouldn't have a personality like Stephen A. Smith, you know, on TV and on radio like he's been. And so I think that sports have definitely become essential to life because it not only gives people an out and all that type of stuff, but it provides so many opportunities for people that they wouldn't have had, you know, in different times and without sports, period.
So as the year moved along, right, there was that whole big question of what is the NCAA going to do? Are they going to award a year of eligibility? If they do, how does that affect this trickle down? I mean, obviously it has a big trickle down effect. They ultimately decided they were going to award a year of eligibility to everyone who missed the spring season. Would you take it if you were in those shoes again? Would you take an extra year?
Like if I was playing sports right now? Yeah, I definitely would take another year. I mean, I'd give anything to go back and play again. So, yeah, no, I would definitely take it. You know, I've got a brother that was affected by that, you know, at West Alabama, and he's getting another year, and he deserves it. I mean, they only got to play. They started in February. They played a month. And, you know, you can look at it and go, oh, they've still got 18 games. That's nothing in a college baseball season.
No,
That's not even a third of the season.
Right.
So they had not even gotten into conference play and all that. So I definitely think that they deserved another year, and I would 100% be taking it. I mean, you never know what happens, especially with – you got some kids that develop late, you know? I mean, that's why you see some kids that go the JUCO route in baseball and then they develop late. And you just never know. I mean, that fifth year that you got, your body could change, your mindset's different, you know, you've matured, and it could be the difference in you becoming a professional athlete or not. So I definitely would have taken advantage of it if I was in school.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that what's interesting is how is that going to affect the next year of recruiting?
Yeah.
You know, for a team like at Alabama who's got a ton of money and a ton of scholarships, it might not matter that much. But for some of these smaller schools, what are they going to do with their next recruiting class if they're having to give scholarships to their former players? And I know they did award, 8 additional scholarships or something like that for.
Yeah, they did something but
like that.
It's still affecting the way that this class is getting recruited.
Right.
Just because of numbers, you know. I mean, there's baseball programs now that are saying, you know, hey, we're only taking 7 guys this year because, you know, as opposed to the 18 that we normally sign.
And even if they have scholarship money, it doesn't mean they have playing spots. I mean,
yeah, no, exactly. You know. So I think that in that sense, and also, I mean, we've seen it in football, these kids haven't been able to take visits. These kids haven't been able to go on campus and do the stuff that a lot of – so, you know, on signing day last week, there was a lot of people getting upset because kids decided to hold off and wait to sign till the spring and, you know, decommitted from places and didn't sign, or they flipped on the day of. They hadn't gotten to go to any of these places. They haven't gotten to do, you know, they're basically just trying to take the word of this coach that they've talked to through Zoom for, you know, 8 months now. And, you know, you had kids that missed out on opportunities because they didn't get to go to camps this summer and those type of things. So while it's great that some of these other kids got a year of eligibility back, and I'm glad, you know, my brother was affected by it. Like I said, it's still affecting other people in a negative way because it is affecting these younger, and I don't even think it's going to be this class as much as it's going to be the juniors
class,
that are underneath, because you're going to have so many people that, especially with the baseball, you know, I talk about baseball like I'm a baseball guy, but baseball's draft went from 40 rounds to 5.
Right.
That's a lot of rounds, a lot
That's
of picks.
a lot of people.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
a lot of picks that aren't getting done. And so, I was talking with someone the other day that's a college coach, and he said, man, the SEC is going to be unreal this year because you've got all these people back that normally wouldn't be back that would have been drafted and gotten opportunities.
Right.
Well, that also affects the people below them. You got guys that are going to be in their third year this year, could probably get drafted, but they're not going to get drafted. They'll be back for 4. So now this junior that was going to be signed by Alabama, Auburn, A&M
Now what
isn't
are they
going to
gonna
get
do?
signed because there's not a spot for him. So it's going to be interesting to see what kind of effect this has long term with people. When do we finally kind of get back to where recruiting is normal in college sports?
Yeah, and I think that's the question, right, of 2020 is when is anything going to be normal again? But I also want to, you mentioned that sports has become a business in high school athletics. It is a business for sure in professional athletics, right? So the NHL and the NBA did basically everything that they could to find a way to come back. Now I know that I'm a huge NHL fan, hockey fan in general. And a lot of those, I think there was about 6 or 7 teams that said, their ownership said, if we don't come back, we're going to have to fold our team.
Yeah.
Based on, we've already paid our players, right? And they haven't done anything. And they did the bubble. Do you think that the way that the NBA and the NHL handled the bubble and coming back and no fans, shortened schedule, all that, do you think that they did it the right way?
I think they did it the only way that you could at that time.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I think. I think we saw it with baseball. Baseball, when they did things the right way, they were fine. It was when teams broke protocol and did other stuff that you had issues, like the Marlins, like the Cardinals, and a couple of these teams that, had big outbreaks in their, within their organizations. For the NBA and NHL, they were in such a bubble that they didn't have any issues.
Yeah.
I mean, the only issue the NHL had no issues, period. The only issue the NBA had was Lou Williams went to a funeral and went by the strip club on the way out and got some wings. That was the only issue there. And then he ended up being fine.
Idea.
Yeah, but he ended up being fine, and nothing happened of it.
True.
So they did it about as good as you could do. Baseball kind of went to that module for the playoffs, basically. They did the best 2 out of 3 series at each team's home stadium, and after that, you went to a certain place, and that's where you played your whole series. And, they kept them all in one spot, and that was probably the best way to do it. It's going to be interesting to see what the NFL does. There's been talk of a bubble. I don't think it's going to happen. I think that you're going to see them traveling, which why not? I mean, they've handled it pretty well. It's been when teams have broke protocol in the NFL that you've had outbreaks. So, I'm a big Packers guy. The Packers hadn't had any issues at all this year, and it's how they handle it. So I think you're going to see teams go about it as normal, but the way that the NBA and NHL handled it at that time was perfect. And it's going to be interesting now with the NBA getting started on the 23rd, what it's going to be like with no fans inside of these arenas and them playing at, having to travel and play at their individual arenas and things like that. So I think we got a true champion. I mean, don't you agree with that? Like in the bubbles? I mean, I think that, you didn't see crowd play into effect. You didn't see, it was just whoever was best that night.
Yeah, I guess I can say that. I just think
and it ended up being the 2 teams that everybody expected to win won it. I mean, the Lightning were expected all year. They were the best team all year. And the Lakers were the best team all year, and they won it. So
now, I hate the NBA completely, so I can't speak to the quality of play at the NBA because it's all terrible to me. But the quality of play
went down because they took so much time off.
Right.
I mean, it was like you were starting a new season in the middle of the playoffs. That was what was so crazy about it.
It was like people were basically playing playoff games in November quality of
But
hockey.
I think like in the NBA, the Heat made it to the finals, and I think the Heat were one of the best teams for a majority of the year, but they would have been a 5 seed, I think is what they were.
Right.
They'd had to go on the road at some point in the play, and they may have never even gotten to the NBA playoffs, even though they were probably the best team in the East last year. And so that's what I liked about it in that sense, was we ended up getting the true winner of each series, and of each, the fans didn't play into effect, being a home court advantage, that type of stuff,
I think
which
that's
matters.
part of sports.
It is part of sports, but I'm just saying that's what made 2020 unique in the fact that we got to literally crown the teams that were the best in the craziest environment that we've had to experience yet, and that type of stuff.
It's pretty terrible if you're a Caps fan, because it was like we waited so long for them to come back just to get swept. I'm pretty sure we got swept.
Yeah.
Maybe we won one game. Can't remember now. As the year moves along, right, the AHSAA decides that it's going to return. we did sort of mention baseball has their 60 game schedule that's moving along. The AHSA decides that it's going to return amid a lot of states not doing that. I did a really interesting project when I was still at the Outlook with a friend of mine from Colorado who's a prep sports editor and a friend of mine from Pennsylvania who's a prep sports editor. And we kind of compared where our states were, when they shut down, what updates. And then we did a whole chart of all 50 states of where they were, when they were coming back. And a lot of them weren't still at this point. And I think the AHSA made the right decision. I was really torn about it. But I think ultimately they did the right thing. What do you think?
I 100% did think that they did the right thing. I think Coach Sav handled it perfect. And, look, this may not sound great, but COVID isn't a matter of if you get it, it's a matter of when you get it. So, I mean, people were going to get, if we were going to go about school like normal, if we're going to go back about our jobs like normal, it's going to spread. That's the bottom line. You can go through all the necessary precautions. But if you look at the HSA season as a whole, the way that everybody handled it. And I think that if you really take a step back and look at it, not even from a sports standpoint, we made kids have to be accountable for everything that they did. Yeah. We made them have to buy into, hey, if you want to be able to play, you better do things the right way. And I think in the long run, I talked to coaches throughout the year that said, I feel like the discipline on our team this year is better than it's been in past year because they had to be. And
I think because they saw what happened to their friends and their potential teammates during baseball. And, so, in a lot of these schools, multiple sport athletes are seeing, that whole cliche of, play this game like it's your last, that's more real than ever.
I was telling someone that in the interview the other day. I said, because they said, we just try to go out there and treat every game like it's our last. And I said, and what's crazy with that is you saying – treating it like it's your last is different than when I was playing in high school and saying treat it like it's your last. Because for me, it was, hey, you could tear your ACL on Friday night and you don't get to play anymore.
Right.
For y'all, your team could be done.
Right.
You don't get a chance. Y'all don't get a chance to finish. There's no champion. There's no going to the playoffs. It's a lot different for them. And I think that was where the realization really hit, was when they saw their spring friends, like you were saying, not get a chance to go play in the playoffs, not get a chance. They don't get to finish together. And for them, it was even worse because it wasn't like they had a 2-week period of, hey, guys, we've only got 2 more weeks of this, so let's enjoy this.
Right.
It was literally, like we said,
overnight.
That Thursday, they start canceling tournaments,
right.
And that Saturday, the HSA said, hey, no more games starting on Monday.
Right.
Don't play anymore. And so a lot of those kids are sitting there on Saturday going, hey, is this our last game, or are we going to be?
Still didn't know,
and, and for them, they're all sitting here going, we'll probably be back in 3 or 4 weeks, and, we'll be all right. It didn't ever happen. And so I think that they got a really good example, because that's all I heard when I interviewed kids was, well, we saw our friends get stuff taken away in the spring, and we know that it could happen to us, so we've got to handle things the right way and do things the right way if we want to be able to complete our year. And credit to all the kids. They did a great job. And we focus on football so much because we're a football state. Football runs things here.
Right.
The girls in volleyball did a great job. To be able to finish their season. We finished swimming this year, and that's an indoor sport. Got it done. We got indoor track going on right now. So cross-country finish. So it's a credit to all these kids and a testament to their just want to be able to play these sports. And it should be an example to all these people out here that are naysayers in sports that, these kids love this, and they love what they get to do, and they're going to do whatever it takes to do that. And I think that we created better men and women at the high school age because of them having to go through what they went through just to have the opportunity this year.
Well, and I also think that it was a perfect year to teach accountability, right? I mean, if you have kids that, God, I would hate to be, in the third round of the football playoffs and I'm the one that gets COVID and now we're out. We're done.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So, and I also know that I didn't do everything I possibly could have to avoid that situation. I think it taught a lot of accountability, and I think it showed that, Coach Sav from the very beginning said, look, I'm not requiring anybody to play sports. I'm not saying you have to. I'm not saying your school district has to have teams. I'm not saying you as an individual have to play. But I'm giving you guys that option, and you've got to make the best decision for you and your life and your community and your family. And people wanted to. I know there were a handful of schools only probably that canceled their whole seasons.
Yeah.
I mean, it was probably, you can count them on both hands.
Well, and those were even more for money purposes.
And
that was more of, hey, we know we're not going to get a big gate this year.
Right.
That's what we rely on to be able to travel. And so if we can't do that, then we're not going to be able to play. And
right.
you hate it, but that is the way it is. And especially in some of these rural counties in Alabama that, we get caught up in talking about Thompson High School, Auburn High School, Hoover, and they're not struggling. But there's other places that are struggling and that, they barely get by with what they have. And they don't have, it's not that they don't have good community support, but there's not a ton of money in the community to support them with.
Well, and I think that's the other thing that needs to be said about football, because like you said, we focus a lot on football. Well, I remember talking to Reeltown coach Matt Johnson when all this happened, and he said, if we have to cancel the football season, I mean, our football games fund our band because they get the concession. They fund our cheerleaders because they get the parking or whatever it was. You know what I mean? There's so much money that is made at a football game that fuels so much else of the school. And I think that's really important that a lot of people don't know and a lot of people don't realize.
No, I mean, it ain't. Some of these sports don't bring in what football brings. I mean, it's just the way it is. I mean, and you can see, go watch any sport. There's less people in an NBA game than there is at an NFL game in normal times.
And also has to do with size of stadium and all those kinds of things. I mean, you can't fit 6,000 people in a gym, but you can fit 6,000 people at a football stadium, some football stadiums.
So, I mean, all that definitely plays into effect. And I think that Coach Sav, being a former coach, people have to understand he's a former coach, former AD. He understands how all this works in money. And he knew that this football season was very important to a lot. And I think you can go to any school around the state and they'll tell you, hey, we're happy that we got to play this year because it's going to allow basketball to play. It's going to allow baseball to play. It's going to allow softball to play, because without it, we wouldn't have been able to afford buses and afford, so. And it's also taken fundraising, that's a big thing, and it's even more important this year. And I understand people are hurting for money, things like that, but understand that when these kids are coming to your door and asking for you to buy a sponsorship or asking you to buy a raffle ticket or anything, you're helping support that program and you're helping keep that program going, because they wouldn't sit and Benjamin Russell High School isn't Alabama. They can't they don't just have money flowing in with sponsorships and things like that. And, so it takes selling these raffle tickets, selling these, coupon books. That's become a big thing. I mean, that type of stuff is what keeps these programs going. And
I think the AHSAA did a good job in terms of their returns. So they kind of, dipped their foot in a little bit and really thought about what they were doing as they did it. And I thought that they did a really good job. And as we've said, I mean, there were obviously some teams that came down with COVID, some teams that had to miss a couple weeks here and there. And I know I've harped on Hanley a lot, but we've talked about Hanley and how that didn't mean that you couldn't win the championship. That didn't mean that you were disqualified. We'll get to this in a little bit, but you look at who the college football playoff teams are. The NCAA has done a good job of, that's debatable. The AHSAA for sure did a good job of, we're not going to count a forfeit completely against you kind of thing. And I thought the way that they handled it, I thought they did a very good job.
Well, and the difference between the NCAA and high school football was, in the AHSAA, everybody was under one umbrella. Everybody was going to go under the same rules, the same blah, blah. With college, SEC decided to play 10 games. True. The ACC decided we're going to have 11 with a non-conference game. The Big 12 decided we're going to play 8 or whatever. I think they did maybe the 10 with a non-conference game. But then the Big 10 comes in and says, hey, we're only going to play 6. And, Pac-12, and we're going to decide after everybody else started playing. That was the biggest difference, I think, with college, whereas with AHSAA, everybody was under one umbrella. Right. Everybody started under the same rules. You had the same type of guidelines. And, here's what it takes for you to get in the playoffs. Everybody knew what it was. You better find a way to do it. And, to the credit of – we only had one playoff game canceled the whole entire time. Yeah. St. Luke's and B.B. Comer's. Only one, and you hate it for St. Luke's. If there was one thing that I would say, I wish they would have put an extra week between the regular season and playoffs if they could have, just to make sure that situation didn't come about to where, hey, you have this week to, make sure you don't have COVID, blah, blah, and we're going to come back.
But they easily then could have gotten COVID in the second round. I mean, anything could have happened.
Anything could have happened, but that's the only thing I would have said. It's like with how SEC tried to have that week in between, and then when games got canceled, they were able to move into that week. That type of stuff, I wouldn't have minded seeing that just for those type of situations. But other than that, only getting one playoff game canceled is pretty good, considering there's, 16 games in each classification, or 8 and 7A, so... It's a lot of games.
And on top of it all, it ended up being a really great Super 7.
Yeah.
There were some exciting moments at the volleyball state championships. I mean, it was all in all, I think, a very good year. And
I mean, Bayside just set the they set the record, the national record, not the state record. They've already got the state record. They've set the national record for consecutive volleyball championships with 19, which is incredible because not only have they won 19 straight, but they've won it at 1A, 2A, 3A, 4A, and now 5A.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And they're going to move up to 6A, and they'll keep winning. I mean, it don't matter.
I agree. And now, so we're into basketball season, getting ready to kind of – it seems like there was a little bit of a lull. Now we're getting right back into it. Obviously, with Christmas, Christmas, there'll be another little bit of a lull. But I think that the AHSA is totally prepared to just – it seems to me like unless they get orders from somebody above Coach Sav, they're going to continue to play and to do it as safely as they can. And I think that's the right move, especially this year.
And it's up to these individual schools to do it the right way, I think, is one of the things that you've got to realize. Like, I think we've all seen some different videos that have gone around from some of these games where some of these gyms are a little bit more packed out than some of these other ones. And that school's taking a risk, to make a little bit more money at the gate. But now you're taking the risk of, hey, you're going to shut down your program for 2 weeks and not get to play games. And how's that going to affect your season in the long run?
Right.
So it's up to these schools to kind of do it the right way. Most schools, I would say 95% are doing it the right way. There are some that I've seen videos of stuff going on at games, and it's a little bit more packed than it probably should be in there.
Right.
But, it is what it is. And as long as these kids have the opportunity to play, and that's what you need to remember as a fan when you're sitting there in the stands and you're complaining about wearing your mask or complaining about what some of the rules are for you as a fan, just know that it's not about you. I mean, you need fans and all that, but once you're there watching these, it's about the guys that are out there playing and keeping them playing, because you may be at that one game, but they're going to be there every single night. Right. They practice every single day, and they're the ones that put in the blood, sweat, and tears to have the opportunity to be out there. So just do what's asked of you and wear your mask. And,
it's not that hard.
Yeah, I mean, I don't enjoy it, but it is what it is. If that's what's asked of you, then that's what's asked of you to keep these guys going.
Yeah, I agree. I do want to talk a little bit about the college football playoffs. As we mentioned, those were announced yesterday when we're recording. This Notre Dame, Alabama, Ohio State, and Clemson. What do you think?
If there was ever a year to expand the playoffs, this would have been the year because of a situation like Ohio State, who only played 6 games, where you look at them and you go, gosh, NFL talent all over the place, and they've beaten everybody that you've put in front of them, but we just hadn't seen enough. There hadn't been that Iowa game that they had to play in between Penn State and Michigan. That is that trap game, and Ohio State only played back-to-back weeks one time all year, and the only 2 teams with a winning record they played was Northwestern and Indiana. So, and them 2 only combined for 1 win total over a team with a winning record. Right. So, my point is we just didn't see enough from Ohio State. So it's hard for me. You're going to ask, do I think they got it right? I don't. I think that Ohio State, while they're a good team, at some point you've got to say, hey, Big Ten, y'all didn't want to jump on board when everybody else did, so you're going to get punished a little bit. We're glad you decided to play, but what you did wasn't enough for us. And
it's disappointing, too, because like you said, I mean, do you count out Ohio State? Because that probably if they had played a full schedule, they would have been good enough to be there. But is probably they would have good enough to be there, you know what I mean?
Especially when a team like Texas A&M is getting left out and their only loss is to the number 1 team in the country the second week of the season.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest disappointment. I mean, you can look at Cincinnati and you can argue what you want, but Cincinnati is, at the end of the day, Cincinnati.
But, I mean, we're sitting here praising Alabama for, we're saying this is the greatest SEC season ever. They won 11 SEC games. Never been done before. They did it by averaging beating people 50-17 the regular season. Right. What about A&M? Their only loss was to that team that you're saying is the most dominant team. And other than that, they beat everybody else in the toughest conference.
And I kept hearing analysts on Saturday that were like, if only they didn't lose by 28 to Alabama. If only they had lost by only a touchdown. Then everybody lost by 28 to Alabama. Yeah. I mean, who cares?
The only team that kept it close was Florida, and it took them scoring at the end of the game to keep it close, needing it onside. I mean, Right. And Ole Miss just had to score with, and they never, that game could still be going right now, and Alabama would have 1,000 points. I mean, they would have never sniffed stopping them. So, I don't like that argument because then it's like, okay, well, how about if Notre Dame doesn't score with 2 minutes to go on Saturday, they lose by 31
Right.
in a neutral site game.
I don't think Notre Dame probably should have been there either. But
yeah, I mean, we're looking back at it, I was happy that Notre Dame beat Clemson when they did, but it'd have been better off for Notre Dame to lose that one because they're not one of the better.
I don't think
I think there's 3 good teams. I think Alabama, Ohio State, and Clemson are good. I think that you got Alabama here, and I think there's a gap, and then there's Clemson here, and I think there's another gap, and there's Ohio State here, and then I think you got everybody else grouped up below them. But if we're talking about who deserves to be in, based off what they did during the season, which to me should be what the whole point of getting the 4 teams is, what did you do in this season? Not what you did last season, not what you did the season before.
Not what you were expected to maybe do.
Yeah, what did you do in this season? I don't think Ohio State should be there, and you can make the argument with Notre Dame that they barely beat Louisville 12-7 at home earlier in the year. They barely beat Boston College or somebody else earlier in the year, and then they got blown out by Clemson, and they beat Clemson at home when Trevor Lawrence was out. You had an offensive lineman out. You had defensive players out. I mean, and they beat them, and it took overtime to beat them at that time.
And here's what I wonder is if they didn't include this. They didn't include Texas A&M because they would have played against Alabama, and we've already seen how that ended. Seems really a bad way to look at it, but if that factored in at all, because I think Notre Dame's probably going to lose by just as much, if not more. But I think that A&M probably could have played with Clemson. Not beat them. Let's not be crazy. But I think they could have played with them.
I mean, I'd make the argument that they could beat them. If Notre Dame could beat Clemson, then I definitely think that on the right day, A&M could. But I get what you're saying. I mean, they would probably compete with them better than that in a neutral site game,
right?
So, and one of the things that I did try to consider the other day watching the game was that the ACC did give them a week off in between, so. They weren't playing, you take the week off and it affects certain teams different. When you're kind of on a roll the way Notre Dame was, you've won 10 straight, but sometimes you don't want that week off, and they had to get the week off in between and broke a little bit of that momentum. And yeah, you can say Clemson had this, but Clemson wasn't on a roll the way Notre Dame was. Notre Dame was on a roll, and they got better as the season went on. I mean, after they beat Clemson, you watched them and you could tell they were getting better. Clemson got to get healthy. They got to, they got all this stuff that in a normal year you wouldn't get. So I had to try to think about that a little bit, but even thinking about that, you don't go out there and get embarrassed basically 34-3 the way they did. It wasn't really close. Bad. I mean, they went from where they scored 40 in that other game to not even being able to move the ball on Saturday.
Right, and that has nothing to do with Trevor Lawrence.
No.
I mean, so we think it'll be Alabama, Clemson?
Clemson's running their mouth about Ohio State. I mean, Dabo came out and said he wouldn't rank them in the top 10, and they're giving them ammo and things like that when, you got a good team, you've got 2 weeks off in between to prepare, I think Clemson's further ahead because they've gotten to play more games. One of the knocks, we talked about, Ohio State's only played 6 games. There's a disadvantage to that, too. They've only gotten to play 6 games. They haven't gotten to go through the fire and battle it out and get better as the season's gone on. They hadn't gotten to play we talked about Hanley and how they didn't get to play consistently all year. Ohio State hadn't gotten that. So
worked out
could Ohio
for them.
State pop up in the playoffs right here and win 2 games and win it? And, then we'd quit talking about how bad they are?
Alabama.
I don't think so. I mean, I don't.
Can't.
I think that Clemson and Alabama are the 2 best teams when you look at them.
Right.
But do I think Ohio State in 1 game could beat Clemson, especially considering last year they were this close to doing it?
True.
I definitely think it's possible, especially with Justin Fields at quarterback. I mean, and they should be able to. They should. They had receivers out against Northwestern. They had some players out in that game. They had 22 players down against them. They're going to be back for Clemson. So how does that help and factor in too?
I did notice that Dabo got a little loud there after the game Saturday, was it? About Trevor Lawrence should be the Heisman Trophy winner, and which he's got a case maybe, but I thought it was interesting that he was so adamant about.
What's funny to me that Dabo's gone from playing we're just little old Clemson,
right?
Hey, we're not ever, we're used to being favorites around here and blah. So
yes. He's played that role well. We love him. He's an Alabama, if y'all didn't know that. So he's a good one. Don't know when we're going to release this podcast, but we do have the NBA starting in just a couple of days. They're supposed to start December 23rd. The NHL is set to scheduled to start January the 20th. The NFL seems to be on par to finish things out, and it's so ironic to me how this year started, right, with Kobe Bryant dying and then the whole world changing, to now it's like, well, maybe it'll just all go as planned, other than the Rose Bowl moving to Texas. I mean, everything else seems to be as it was a year ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a weird year, but the way that we're going to be able to finish it all, and it's going to be a shortened NHL and NBA season, but we're still it's going to feel more normal than last year without a break in the middle of it and stuff.
True.
So, and I'm hoping that eventually, during the middle of these years and by hopefully around the time baseball starts, we're getting fans back in these places. You know, I mean, it may not. I don't know when we'll see 100% capacity again, but more than 20%, more than 30%.
I will say that I thoroughly enjoyed. I went to see the Lions play at the Falcons, and I thoroughly enjoyed going to see a game in a pandemic because, we parked 2 blocks from the stadium.
Yeah.
There was no line for concession stands. There was no line for security. So
no, I mean, I went to the Alabama and Texas A&M game.
Yeah.
And went to the Alabama and Georgia game this year.
Just fly through the line.
Yeah,
great.
That part was nice about it. I can tell you, the A&M game was a 2:30 game when it was still kind of hot at the time, and it felt worse than what going to a spring game. From an atmosphere standpoint, there was maybe 16,000 people in there. They didn't fill up all the seats that were allotted for the percentage, and that wasn't as fun. The Georgia game was fun. Now, it wasn't what packed house, night game, lights going, all that would have been. I was looking back at some video. I went to the Alabama LSU game last year and was looking back at some video from that game, and the atmosphere and just, when you have that many people in there, it's totally different. But it was still fun in the sense of I got to spread out in my chair, have my feet spread out.
We had a whole row to ourselves.
And that part of it was nice. You kind of got to relax with the game. You go to the bathroom when you felt like, go to the concession stand when you felt like. So it was cool to experience that. I went to the Alabama basketball opener at home this year. I just wanted to see what it was like in there, during the middle of a pandemic. Probably won't go back because it's not, 1,800 people in there. Yeah, I mean, especially when you go from in Coleman, 1,800 seats or 1,800 people in there right now, compared to being able to sit 15,000 on a normal night.
It's not the same.
It's a lot different. But I hope we get back to having fans in the stands by the time baseball gets to rolling, and by the time we're in the middle of NHL and NBA. Because I will tell you, with NHL, I love watching hockey. I mean, big hockey guy. It was really weird not having fans at the hockey games more than anything, because when you see a goal or a big the impact that the crowd has at that time and the way they can get into a game, it was a little bit different. NBA is not as much as college. Anyway. Yeah, I mean, it's not the same as college with how the crowd gets involved, because you watch NBA and they're all kind of hyped at the beginning, and then it's literally till about the game gets really good in the fourth quarter that everybody's back into it and it's loud. With hockey, this hockey atmospheres, you haven't watched a hockey game, you're missing out. Because
if you haven't gone to a hockey game, you're missing out. Once there are fans allowed, large amounts of fans allowed back in arenas, definitely go to a hockey game. And hockey is the only one that seems to have changed. They kind of realigned the division so that there's a Canadian division, again, for not bubble, but more of a bubble purpose.
How crazy is it, a Canadian hockey team hadn't won Stanley Cup since 1993?
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, almost 30 years now.
That's crazy. So maybe this will be the year now that they're all played together. But
I'll tell you another thing. I mean, the UFC being able to go the way that they have this year has been pretty remarkable. Just because of the fact that they hadn't changed. I mean, still 2 guys in there in their shorts, no shirt on, sweating, fighting. And they've gotten by with almost a full schedule. They took 2 months off in the middle of the pandemic.
Yeah,
you had the whole Fight Island deal. Yeah, I mean, they were the first major sports company in the United States that was back rolling in May. They went down to Jacksonville, Florida for a couple of weeks, and then they've been between Vegas and Abu Dhabi for the last 6 months and have made it work. And I think they deserve a lot of credit, because I think a lot of other professional sports organizations looked at the way they handled COVID, travel, all that type of stuff to get it done, and to do it in a sport where you're sweating on each other and doing all that, it's pretty. You
cannot stay 6 feet away.
And they've had issues. There's been guys that they've had fights pulled the day before. Hey, this guy tested positive for COVID. Fight tomorrow's off. Main events that got pulled, but they've just managed to make it work.
Yeah.
And people aren't as big into UFC as I am stuff, but they were really the front runners in the United States of getting professional sports back going, and deserve a lot of credit for how they've handled it and the way they've been able to finish out a whole year of fights, it was nothing.
Yeah. I think in general, the sports world deserves some credit this year. It's been this is by far and away the weirdest sports year that I can remember. I know I'm not that old, but I mean, I think that goes for anyone who, whether they're 80 or whether they're 10, the weirdest sports year, the hardest sports year for everyone involved. And so whether it was the AHSAA or UFC or, the NFL, I think that everyone did a good job of getting through it and trying their best to get back to as normal as possible. And I think the great thing about sports is no one seemed to judge how everyone else was doing it.
Yeah.
The NFL did it the way the NFL needed to do it. The NBA did it the way they needed to do it. The AHSAA let communities decide, and it was like that. Because like you said, I mean, COVID's here, unfortunately. It's really, really sad. It's really, really hard. But you got to do what's best for your life.
And credit to ESPN, Fox, and all these TV, because they found ways to still try to bring you the games. And, we got commentators sitting in their living rooms and sitting in their houses.
Although I'll be really happy when that awful drone NFL angle is over with, because it's
I agree.
Easy to watch a game.
But for them to figure out a way to still get people, to get commentators there, cameramen there safely, and get all that, they deserve credit for that too, because we wouldn't be watching sports without those organizations. So.
And we needed that after this year. So 2020 has been a difficult year, but I'm glad that there's still a lot of good sports moments to look back on.
Oh, no doubt. It's been a fun year. I mean, it's been crazy. It's been wild, but I mean, we're sitting here on Christmas Day. We're going to have college football, NFL football, NBA, and we normally only have the NBA games going on. So it's going to grant us a packed day on that day.
True.
And like we talked about, I mean, we're still finishing things: the NFL playoffs, NBA playoffs, NHL, college football, like we normally would. And that's a credit to all these people figuring out a way to get it done.
Yeah. So, we appreciate y'all tuning in with us throughout our football previews this year, and I'm sure we'll be back to talk about sports. And hopefully 2021 will be better.
Yeah, with fans.
No matter how good this year has been, let's make it better.
Let's make it the same type of year with sports, but with fans in the stands.
And with sports the whole year.
Yeah, all year. No
none
breaks.
Of this couple months in between. Yeah. So, awesome. Well, thank y'all for joining us. We appreciate you.